So this is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel broadcasting under the banner of the abyAngelGeronimo editions. This is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast on the internet, only on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial. And this is being broadcast on Saturday, 22nd of July 2023. The first attention has to be paid to various items carried in the weekend FT, including the piece in the FT Weekend magazine, which is devoted to rumble in the swamp. And they describe it as how a squad of MAGA, that is Make America Great Again, patriots, flush with cash, turned on each other in an orgy of recrimination. And inside there is this item byline to one of the FT's staff, Gillian Tett, spelled T-E-T-T. Gillian Tett is like another one on the media, British media, Helen Lewis. These two come across as constipated. When they speak, they come across as constipated. They've got a permanent constipation attack on them. But just for the records, I'm referring to Gillian Tett. Otherwise, I would not. I would prefer not to refer to her, as I avoid Helen Lewis as well. When I say their constipation, I also refer to their racism and their congenital selfishness and so on. Now, there is a piece, portraits by Devin Christopher, and the piece is by Joel Stein. It's MAGA Meltdown. It's a woman who is being given the description on page 24 of the FT Weekend magazine. Dr. Simone Gold became a far hero during the pandemic by raising millions to take on the medical establishment. Then she went to prison for entering the US Capitol on January the 6th. That's when a brawl for control of her non-profit began, pitting Gold and her model boyfriend against a reality show boxer, a pastor, and an ex-sheriff. So this is the cover of the Financial Times magazine that usually is not seen on the so-called management magazine publication designs. More often they're seen on the, let's say, student newspaper magazine publication scene. So this Gillian Tett piece asks the question, is the United States sleepwalking into Trump take two? What she's saying there is that Trump is almost very likely to become elected again. Her last paragraph is, I'm not suggesting that a dystopian Trumpian future is preordained. My own mind boggles at the idea too. But we can't ignore the possibility. History shows that not taking such risks seriously can mean they become more likely to occur. Perhaps someone should remake Stoppard's play set in America in 2023. I would watch it, she says. Her past paragraph, of course, is, well, the second paragraph, really. But let's read the both first and second paragraphs. At a dinner party last week, she means in America, tech, academia, and a former senator, one of my neighbors, whispered across the table, "Do you think we are living in Leopoldstadt?" For those who have not seen Tom Stoppard's much award-winning play of that name, it centers on a Viennese Jewish family who initially dismissed the threats of the Nazis as fantastical, but later pay a terrible price. This might not seem relevant to America in 2023, and my dining companion did not make the comparison specifically because of the rising anti Semitism. Her fear is that America's establishment may currently be sleepwalking towards a different threat, which they would prefer to dismiss as far fetched, this time in relation to former President Donald Trump. The next paragraph, I'm now into the fourth paragraph. Polls suggest that Trump is easily the most popular candidate among Republican leaning voters. A CNN poll last month suggested that 47% back him as a presidential nominee. The clear implication is that he would almost certainly win the presidential nomination. If the vote was held today and he was up against several challengers, as is currently the case. Indeed, almost everyone at this dinner party assumed that the 2024 vote would be a choice between Trump and the current President Joe Biden. Other gatherings I have attended echo this. Despite polls suggesting Biden has a slight edge, many of the guests who thought there was a reasonable chance that Trump could win that contest, particularly if the economy falters between now and next year, and crucially, if a third party candidate emerges to split the Democratic vote. Cornel West, a popular intellectual, seems likely to run on a Green Party ticket, for example. And the number one labels group, which describes itself as bipartisan, is considering fielding either West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin or former governor of Maryland Larry Hogan. As the polling website 538 points out, initial evidence suggests that in a rematch between Biden and Trump, a no labels and or West campaign could pull marginal support from Biden and subtly shift the election towards Trump. It is also notable that my dining companions, including people who have known Trump for decades, suspect that a second term would differ from the first. One predicted he would be hell bent on taking revenge on anyone who had challenged him in the first term, and people who worked with him, that is Trump, in the White House, tell me he will struggle to get establishment figures to work with him again, given how many were burned during his first term. That means his team could be even more renegade. A re elected Trump would be emboldened to challenge existing institutions. Analysts at the Bridgewater Hedge Fund recently warned clients that a term is likely to produce further degradation of several long standing US government institutions and norms, and an increased risk of visible political conflict and instability. Just the prospect of a close contest heightens risk of one side or the other contesting or not accepting the truth. Bridgewater notes. So far, the establishment doesn't seem particularly panicked about these dark prognoses. Maybe this reflects a presumption that Trump will be knocked out of the contest by a lawsuit. This week, he moved closer to being indicted over the uprising on January the 6th, 2021. Or maybe they assume that the prospect of Trump so horrifies Democrats that they will flock to the polls to back Biden. Whatever because there is the table that I'm able to rest the laptop on, I'm having to struggle to put a stable facade on my lap. Or reading that again, or maybe they assume that the prospect of Trump so horrifies Democrats that they will flock to the polls to back Biden, whatever their misgivings. But I suspect that another factor is the message of Leopold's dad, that establishment figures who have ridden to success in a country that purpose to reverse, I'll read that again, that establishment figures who have ridden to success in a country that purpose to revere its constitution and democracy find it extremely hard to imagine this falling apart. It's human nature to assume that if shocking events occur, they are a temporary aberration, be that the January 2021 uprising or the 2016 election of Trump, be that the January 2021 uprising or the 2016 election of Trump. The hard truth, it seems to me, is that America's establishment is increasingly divorced in a cognitive sense from many low income citizens. Hence, the continuing high levels of support for Trump and the fact that when a Chapman University poll asked voters about their biggest current fear, the top ranked issue was corrupt government officials, which seems very odd until you realize that, like Trump, parts of the right wing media constantly invoke the Washington swamp. I'm not suggesting that a dystopian Trumpian future is preordained. My own mind boggles at that idea too. But we can't ignore the possibility. History shows that not taking such risks seriously can mean they become more likely to occur. Perhaps someone should remake Stoppard's play set in America in 2023. I would watch it. Now, that is the usually constipating Gillian Tett in the Financial Times magazine, FT Weekend magazine, which is devoted to rumble in the swamp, how a squad of MAGA patriots flush, flush with money, flush turned on each other in an orgy of recrimination. Now, this takes us all the way away from the USA to the UK, and the same Financial Times, this time, their Lex column, the UK FT Weekend, the Lex column on the back page, which is page 22, which is headed NatWest stroke Farage, what Rose now knows. Now, this is the leading piece in that column, the Lex column, which is regular Financial Times kind of intelligence column about the finance. This leading item is completely devoted to attacking this woman, Alison Rose, who is the boss at the National Westminster Bank, which actually owns the Coutts Royal Bank. Coutts is spelled Coutts. Coutts Bank is owned by the NatWest Bank. So let's have a read of this particular part. NatWest once stood tall in the city. When they talk about city, they mean city of London, not the wider city of London, but the city with a capital C, which is 1 mile traditionally housing the financial institutions. Traditionally, it's no longer the case because many of the financial businesses moved to Canary Wharf, which is ironically in the London borough of Tower Hamlets. Generally, Tower Hamlets Council is notorious for corruption, but Tower Hamlets borough as a whole is at the top of the list of most boroughs in all of England. So let's read the whole thing again, the first paragraph in the Lex column. And their Twitter is at FT Lex. So follow-ups can be there, chased there or observed there. The NatWest once stood tall in the city of London. I mean, this is the city of London, which is the smallest part of the London capital city, the metropolis. So NatWest once stood tall in the city, occupant of London's first modern skyscraper. It has a humbler mien. Today, a spat with Nigel Farage reflects poorly on the lender. Now remember, this piece, this Lex column, has got references to Nigel Farage as if he is almost as big as a political party or even as big as the whole cabinet. What the British media has done over the last 30 years in the context of the repulsive attacks on the idea of the United Kingdom being in the European Union has been to overstate the importance of and overrate the quality and the contributions of the likes of the criminals, Nigel Nasty Farage. Farage is a criminal because he's still now an undischarged bankrupt because he stole money from the European Union while he was a member of the European Union under various excuses and pretexts, mainly allowing so on. So this is my assertion. And the FT Weekend or any other paper, no, none of them would say that. I'm saying it. So this is literally world exclusive, original, analytical, ethical, moral transparency observation by me, Muhammad Haq. So read this again because of the impact that I'm going to build into the rest of the column. NatWest once stood tall in the city, that is the city of London, occupant of London's first modern skyscraper. It is a humbler mien today. A spat with Nigel Farage reflects poorly on the lender. They say that Nigel Farage is morally on a higher level. Fuck them. Private bank Coutts, owned by NatWest, closed their account of the former pro Brexit party leader without his consent. Fuck them again. He's not a party leader, he's a crook. He would not be able to lead a party under any pretext or decoration today at all. Nigel Farage has been a fraudster right from the word go, and he has been able to become a fraudster while at the same time being given platform that he does not deserve because he is immoral, he is corrupt, he is dishonest, and he is a thief. So we'll go back to the piece. NatWest boss Alison Rose has apologized. The episode calls her judgment and oversight into question. Fuck them again for the third time. They've got it wrong for the third time in that column so far already. NatWest had represented the closure of Farage's court's account. Closure, as if he had a multi-billion pound account. He didn't. NatWest had represented the closure of Farage's court's account as an essentially commercial decision. The value of his mortgage had fallen below its 1 million borrowing threshold. Farage claims he was ejected mainly because of his right of center opinions now. This is fuck them again for the fourth time, the fucking financial crimes. Because in the piece that Gillian Tett has written, she has made two references to Tom Stoppard's play based on the mistaken confidence that was prevalent among the well off Jews in Europe just before the assertion by the Nazis of the genocidist attacks that targeted and victimized a large number of Jews. So it's those people that this Lex column is elevating to right wing. It's not calling them fascists, it's not calling them Nazis, and it's not calling them anything similar to what Gary Lineker called them. Well, the Nazis' language of the 1930s, being used by Suella Ivila Cruella Fernandez. So the Financial Crimes, which is edited, so called, the main paper is supposedly edited by this woman, Raula Khalaf. Raula Khalaf is, or Roala Khalaf, whatever the spelling, and I shall check that just to be on the correct side. Khalaf is historically described in the wiki entry, which is no longer there. The entry has been edited so that her being referred to as born as a Muslim in Lebanon and raised as a Muslim in Lebanon, those two references have gone. which haven't gone because Wikipedia wanted to have them gone. It's Rola Khalaf who wanted the connection with her birth as a Muslim and her upbringing as a Muslim to be removed so that she can come across as corrupt and corruptly imperialistic and racist and pro-Nazis as she can manage. So we go back to the Lex column, which is corrupt and Nazi backing, Nazi leaning. Nest had represented the closure of Farage's court's account as an essentially commercial decision. The value of his mortgage had fallen below its 1 million borrowing threshold. Farage claims he was ejected mainly because of his right of center opinions. That is apparently confirmed by extracts from internal bank documents. These use some unfortunate language. Now, the whole column, in the Lex column, let's say, the whole part devoted to Nasty Nigel Farage is written in a way that is designed to make this criminal come across as a morally highly ethical individual. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nigel Nasty Farage is a published, proven liar, a proven racist, a proven inciter of hatred against Muslims. And while he was at the Dulwich School, in Dulwich, which is in the London Borough of Southwark, he extensively wrote as a schoolboy, boastful pieces about racist hatred. So not only was he comparable to the racists at the time, the National Front, he was far worse than them in the context of his actual traceable record. Who said that? One of the few temporarily investigative journalists in the United Kingdom who has had positions in the BBC and has worked for the ITB and has been a political correspondent on Channel 4 News, Michael Crick. Michael Crick wrote a book. Let's check what Michael Crick actually wrote about Nasty Nigel Farage. Now, this is one party after another. That is the title of the book, and it is kind of promoted in a review published on the Open Democracy website and bylined by Martin Shaw on 20th of February 2022. One party after another should, of course, be the title of a book about Boris Johnson's current crisis. Instead, this is Michael Crick's study of Nigel Farage. And the parties in question are political organizations rather than work events, although The former UKIP leader will appreciate the irony, as he ought really most of Johnson's political output, since it is designed for his electorate. I read Crick's lengthy biography. Working about it might contain some killer information that I had missed. Now, I'll read that again because I misread one word. I read Crick's lengthy biography, worrying that it might contain some killer information that I had missed. Just after returning the proofs of my book on political racism, Brexit, and its aftermath. Yet, although Crick impressively brings together more information about Farage than anyone else, he basically confirms the emerging consensus, and the consensus being Farage was necessary for Brexit and the hard right Tory government to happen, but was not a sufficient cause. Standing back from Crick's picture of Farage's life, often as disruptive for the man himself as for our political system, one sees the continuities from the schoolboy who Crick tells us doodled National Front. Now, remember I said, even before I read this review, that while he was at school in Dulwich, he was very much an active racist National Fronter. Crick tells us doodle National Front NF Nigel Farage to the shrewd political entrepreneur who scooped up the votes of conservative voters, members, councillors, and even members of parliament in European elections, reducing the Tories' vote share to less than 9% in 2019. Farage once claimed to have created Johnson, and he has certainly been a key conduit for the mainstream of the far right that we now see in the nationalist Tory regime. Driven by hostility to the European Union, Farage's key insight was that the way to make United Kingdom withdrawal popular was to hitch it to the power-light hostility to immigration, remember? So the whole idea that Brexit was some kind of mysterious product of some unexplainable, inexplicable, deep crisis within the Conservatives. Essentially, Brexit was, is, and will always be the racist propaganda, racist platform, and racist campaign. So, reading that again, Farage once claimed to have created Johnson, and he has certainly been a key conduit for the mainstream, for the mainstreaming, that is the verb transitive, mainstreaming of the far right that we now see in the nationalist Tory regime in the United Kingdom. Driven by hostility to the European Union, Farage's key insight was that the way to make UK withdrawal popular, remember Powell and racism equals popular, but the way to make UK withdrawal popular was to hitch the withdrawal to the Enoch Powell hostility to immigration, which, after the marginalization of Enoch Powell himself, Farage's hero, had increasingly become the preserve of extreme right groups. So Farage tried to make Powellism respectable, even claiming with typical Fox innocence, that is the false innocence, in a quote that Crick doesn't seem to have picked up. Notice what I said about Crick. But this is the bit by this critic who is getting it right. He's saying that Creek failed to pick that one. The quote is here. I knew, that is Farage is saying, that touching the immigration issue was going to be very difficult. The only thing that upsets me about it is that had it been willfully and overtly a racist message, I might have deserved some of the criticism. But it wasn't. It never was. It never ever was. It was a logical argument about numbers. Society, what a stupid, illogical, dishonest criminal Farage is. Now, the reviewer goes back. This numerical racism, as I level it, depended on racializing the very idea of immigrant and is the common currency of the Tory right. And campaigns such as Migration Watch, which pretend that they are bothered only about the numbers of people entering the UK, not their ethnicity. It's a type of inferential racism, as cultural theorist Stuart Hall said, which can be traced back to before the Farage was born, but he used it in 2006 2016 to build a pro Brexit coalition of all those who would say, I'm not a racist, but. Although Farage avoided the crude emotive language about blacks, which Powell indulged in 1968, Farage's campaign was still targeted chiefly against Muslims and Eastern Europeans. Remember what I said even before reading this, because it is so absolutely fact based that it had to be there. While in the 1964 general election, the notorious Tory propaganda in Smethwick in Birmingham had warned, if you want a nigger for a neighbor, vote Labour. Farage would say 50 years on, any normal and fair minded person would have a perfect right to be concerned if a group of Romanian people moved in next door. The sentiment was the same, of course. While Michael Creek documents Farage's record of racism, he disappointingly avoids judging it. Now, Michael Creek is a midget. I mean, he is about, how tall is he? He's about 4 feet tall at most. That would not be obvious to people watching him on television because the camera angles are organized in such a way that Michael Creek, he can be a crook as well, and he is a crook when he is a racist. Michael Creek comes across not only as of average size, but sometimes bigger than the average size of the television person in the news or reporting the news. And this reviewer is absolutely right, spot on. He said the sentiment was the same. Of course, while Creek documents Farage's record of racism, he, that is Creek, disappointingly avoids judging it. So the reviewer goes on. Farage's UKIP made most of the running on immigration and Europe, but there was always a deep synergy with conservatives. Tory leaders had already tried anti immigrant populism. During the 2016 Brexit referendum campaign, Dominic Cummings, Vote Leave, fronted by Johnson and other Tories, pinched Farage's best lines and turned them into a far more overwhelming racist campaign than the Farage led Leave EU's. It suited all sides, however, for Farage's breaking point poster to become the referendum's ultra racist moment, with Michael Gove piously claiming to have shuddered when he saw it. Gove is a racist, complete, absolute twat. Farage's importance can be measured by the fact that 60%, now I'll read that again because I've got the number wrong. Farage's importance can be measured by the fact that 67% of those who voted Leave in 2016 had also doubled with UKIP over the previous 2 years. Significantly, Michael Crick shows that Dominic Cummings' famous slogan, "Take Back Control," which synchronized with the idea of immigration control and gave popular substance to the call for sovereignty, had been repeatedly used by Farage. Overall, Farage excelled. His hero, 23 June 2016, was a bigger racist moment than 26 April 1968, when Powell spoke in Wolverhampton. Powell failed to reverse colored immigration, but Faragism, once taken up by the Tory right and embedded in Theresa May's and Johnson's Brexit, ended freedom of movement and partially reversed the flow of Europeans into the UK as well as of Britons to other European Union countries. Not only that, but while Commonwealth origin citizens of color have rights, even if Windrush continues to violate them, Brexit has left millions of previously secure European residents with only provisional status, and all of them without proper documentation. Now that's the Tories. Now that the Tories are the Brexit party, Farage is in the middle of one of his wild withdrawals from party politics. The man in Downing Street has adopted Farage's playbook and is doing a better job than he could of Trumpifying the United Kingdom. Yet, opportunist as ever, Farage now attacks Johnson in the Daily Telegraph and from his new perch at GB News, and has done more than anyone to turn refugee dinghies in the English Channel into a political issue. It would sadly be wrong to think that Crick's book is mainly of historical interest. So, this reviewer, let's check who I have been reading. This is interesting because he actually is a rare writer about Crick on Farage that actually gets quite a few things right. So, let's check who this reviewer individual is. I, let's see who this Martin Shaw is. And this piece is dated 20th of February 2022, while Johnson was still in post. Well, I'm looking for the Martin Shaw in the Wikipedia. I can't find that one. The only Martin show that does appear is the actor Martin Shaw, who most certainly is not the one who wrote this review of Michael Crick's book. So let's say that we'll leave that Martin Shaw, further research into Martin Shaw for the time being, and we shall look at the actual book that Crick has written. I started to talk about Michael Crick as a racist, and I just discussed his being too tiny. He's a midget. I will complete the description of Michael Crick another time, and I will be referring to my one and only so far physical encounter with him, which happened outside the Royal Courts of Justice in the Strand in London on 23rd of April 2015. And this is the Michael Crick's one party after another. And it says the disruptive life of Nigel Farage. And it's published in here, it says, by Simon and Schuster. I'll read a bit of the introduction that I can access at this time. And it says, swearing I'll read that again because I got that word wrong. Sweating heavily, the pilot put out a mayday call. His passenger awaited his fate, having decided there was nothing he could do or say to help. He considered calling or texting his nearest and dearest, but didn't see how that would assist much either. He thought about lighting a cigarette, but then remembered how a lot of fuel might be spilt if the aircraft had to crash land, which it soon did. It was early morning on the day of the British general election of 2010. In its final moments, the two-man plane had plummeted to earth at 80 miles an hour. The impact separated the engine from its mounts and collapsed the landing gear, an official report found later. As the fuselage had hit the ground, the front section dug in and the aircraft pivoted forwards, coming to rest inverted. It's strange, Nigel Farage reflected years later. Initially, you are filled with fear, and as the ground rushes up, a sort of sense of resignation, kind of feeling, well, if this is it, let's hope it's all over quickly. Farage opened his eyes. There is light. Good God, I am still here, he thought to himself, still strapped into his seat. He could see the grass right in front of his nose. His face was almost touching it. His blood was dripping onto the turf. Another few inches, and the former and future leader of the UK Independence Party would surely have been dead. And the momentous decade which enveloped the British 2010 might have been very different matter of whether or not the United Kingdom would stay a member of the European Union. The Brexit followed in ways which never even its repercussions were never intended by those like Raj, who had long fought with the European Union. Well, remember, this book was published in 2022 or maybe late 2021. Whenever it was actually edited finally, would have been 2020 to 2021 or thereabouts. Politicians of modern, then he overrates Farage. He's been a more significant player than most leaders of the traditional political parties, more influential than quite a few prime ministers. Nigel Farage is the only man ever to have won a national election as leader of an insurgent party. And he managed that astonishing feat twice, 5 years apart, leading two different parties. Yet Farage has never been elected to the House of Commons, never served as a government minister, and will almost certainly never achieve either role. He will go down as one of the great political communicators of our age, a man with a rare instinctive feeling for public opinion, yet someone who managed to fall out with many of those in his parties and beyond who were committed to the very same cause. Nigel Farage two has written two I'll read that again because this paragraph is quite a non starter. Nigel Farage has written two what one might loosely call autobiographies Fighting Bull 2010 and The Purple Revolution 2015. He features heavily in a couple of early histories of UKIP, and Owen Bennett has written two highly readable chronicles of Farage during the referendum period. But surprisingly, until now, notably, has nobody has published a biography in traditional book form, though in 2015 a Kindle an autobiography was published by Matthew Lynn. In 2019, when a sympathetic former UKIP candidate, Nigel Jones, let's see if it goes on, took Farage to lunch and announced he would like to write a book, Farage made it clear that he wasn't keen, and so Jones dropped the idea. I have written six previous biographies, mostly on political subjects, and in a strange way, this one has been harder to research and write than any before. In part, this has been due to the 2020 to 2021 COVID restrictions, which hindered face to face interviews and visits to archives, but largely because, like one of my early subjects, Jeffrey Archer, no aspect of Nigel Farage's life is ever dull, not even his years trading metal futures in the City of London. His 2010 polling day air crash was one of three occasions on which Farage has come close to death. His political career is regularly punctuated with spectacular bust ups. Every move in his two main parties, UKIP and the Brexit Party, seemed to involve intrigue. And he's made an impact beyond the United Kingdom, admired by Donald Trump and publicly vilified by Hillary Clinton. In Europe, adversaries who initially derided this English upstart came to fear and have a sneaking regard, almost an affection for him. Top that with a highly colorful personal life, and the biographer is deluged with a wealth of material. And with Farage's new career as a presenter with GB News, the stream of Farage opinions and interventions is unlikely to subside. This is a piece by Michael Crick himself. I have frequently interviewed Farage over the years, yet oddly can't recall when I first met him. During the Labour government of Gordon Brown, confirming, I'll read that again. During the Labour government of Gordon Brown, continuing into the coalition of David Cameron and Nick Clegg, I like to think I was one of the first broadcasters to spot that UKIP represented a significant and expanding body of opinion in British politics, which deserved proper coverage. This was not a view shared by all my colleagues at the BBC, ITN, or Channel 4, many of whom thought it was wrong to boost UKIP by giving them publicity. To interview Nigel Farage in front of a camera To interview Nigel Farage in front of a camera was always a challenge, always a fun, never dull. On one occasion, we enjoyed what's fondly called a PFL, a proper Farage lunch, or proper fucking lunch, at his favorite lunchtime haunt, Boysdale in Victoria, with beer, the seasonal grouse, and plenty of red wine. Though my guest did insist on regular fag breaks in the restaurant's upstairs open air smoking area. Faraj seemed rather disappointed and unimpressed when I announced around 4 p.m. that I had to get back to work. But we had the odd this is an independent biography. He has not helped beyond answering the odd question on one or two occasions when we have met for other reasons. It is certainly not authorized, that horrible term, or likely to be endorsed by the subject. In a free democratic society, journalists have the not just a right but a duty to explore and understand the lives of politicians and those who aspire to lead us. I told Nigel Farage about this book at the very start, and he was wary about it, understandably, perhaps. Many of his friends sensibly took the view that they had a duty to speak up for him, though a few were so cautious as to be a waste of time, as to be a waste of time. Quite a few people want nothing to do with. I'll read that again because the laptop slips off the lap. Quite a few people wanted nothing to do with this project, in some cases because Faraj was an experience they wanted to forget. The book would not be written without first class research by Henry Dyer. I wonder if that Dyer is the same spelling as the mass murderer of Amritsar in 1919, the Dyer who was the British military general. Who did a great job wading through many of the numerous UKIP blogs and also in fact checking. My former television colleague Philip Brond was currently generous. Well, I'll read that again because I've read that one word wrong. My former television colleague Philip Brond was extremely generous in supplying the fruits of his UKIP and Farage research over many years. I'm grateful also to Seth Theovoz and Sophie Brokenshire for their research contribution. Now, is this Brokenshire in any way connected with the late conservative Theresa May cabinet minister James Brokenshire. I also I was also the beneficiary of a big suitcase and two large crates of documents from the early years of UKIP, supplied by the Conservative MP Craig McKinley, which was an astonishingly generous act given relations between us in the not too distant past. I'm reading the whole introduction for the record. I was also the beneficiary of a big suitcase, yeah. So that is the Craig McKinley thing, which was an astonishingly generous act given relations between us, that is McKinley and Crick, in the not too distant past. The former UKIP MEP Jim Carver also supplied scores of editions of the party magazine Independence. Stuart Dunbar was assiduous in helping with Dulwich College lists. Another huge contributor was, I'll read that again. Another huge contributor wishes to remain anonymous, but I couldn't have done without their meticulous UKIP archive. They were incredibly patient with my regular queries and helped add a huge amount of extra UKIP color and detail. Thank you also to Louis Baston, David Cowling, Christopher Wilson, Gary Gibbon, Phil Hornby, Anna Maria Townley, and Caroline Morgan for their help in various ways. Jackie Mays did a splendid job exploring the genealogy based on previous work by John Hitchcock, Beverly Hetherington, and Moira Hall transcribed several interviews. My partner Lucy Hetherington put huge care into reading my manuscript and suggested substantial improvements. My daughter Catherine picked up numerous flaws and inconsistencies in the text. Every biography needs a family tree, and Catherine drew the Farage pedigree on pages 544 to 545. I'm especially grateful to Ian Chapman and Ian Marshall at Simon and Schuster, and to Kat Isles, Polly Curtis, and the rest of the team for their diligence and extreme patience, and to Martin Soames for his wise legal advice. The book involved around 300 interviews, just a fraction of which are cited in the footnotes. A big thank you to all those who gave of their time and memories, and in many cases, fished, fished out valuable material. My big disappointment is that the pandemic greatly restricted my ability to visit places which are key to the story, and I wasn't able to meet more of my sources in person. You can only go so far with Zoom. There will inevitably be one or two errors. These are entirely my fault. If you let me know about them, I will try to correct them in future editions. So that's Michael Creek. in November 2021 in London. So, does he have the reason I started talking about Michael Crick on Faraj was because it was Crick's book, research, that I read for the first time, where anyone had discussed Faraj's school years. So we have to wait until another time when I can get into the discussion about the book that Crick has written about Faraj, especially discussing Faraj's detailed, explicit confession that he was a national fronter, he was racist, and he was an avid supporter of everything racist. Now, I can briefly refer to Michael Crick in the encounter that I had with him outside the Royal Courts of Justice. Well, this is I don't believe that the court is remotely about justice at all. Never has been, never will be. The reason I noticed Crick was that when the first breaking comments were being made outside the court on the 23rd of April 2015 by various individuals about the ruling that Richard Morey had just made a few minutes previously, I noticed Crick because I know the Crick frame with his appearance, etc., from many television programs, news programs, etc. So that frame led me to the body, the rest of it, and suggested that it was Crick. But I could not figure out how small he was. I mean, he was really small, very tiny, very short. That, as a photographer, inquisitive as ever, drew me ever closer to him so that I could film him in various kind of movements that he was making just for the accuracy of the record. And at one point, I tried to say something to him about what was going on in the news at that time. And Michael Crick gave me the kind of constipated look that I have not been given directly by anyone else so far, as far as I could remember. And I thought, now this guy is not as enlightened, let alone as social, as he could be and should be. I followed him around outside the Royal Courts of Justice for a few minutes and then I gave up because I had seen him enough. Later on that day, that is 23rd of April 2015, it appeared that Crick were the one who must have rushed to the then town hall of Tower Hamlets Council called Mulberry Place in E14 2BG, where somehow, somewhere in that complex, he found the name of Luthuraman still there. Now, why was that important? Because he wanted to be the breaker of the exclusive news, that although Richard Morey, the election commissioner, had already declared that Ruthuraman was no longer the incumbent mayor in post in Tower Hamlets Council, the council bureaucracy had still not caught on down, not caught up with the fact, and had allowed the name of Luthuraman to remain on as the mayor. That's the significance. But of course, Michael Crook, as I have to call him, despite the fact that he has written several books and he lists in that introduction that I read earlier, 6 books, Michael Creek has not produced, to my knowledge, any breaking commentary about corruption in British society, about racism, about anything. So, why is he worth noting? The reason is that he is forever peddling himself and promoting himself, etc., etc. I shall come to that another time. Now, the Financial Times, the Lex column, the rest of the Lex column I'll read before I move on to other aspects of this edition. Remember, this Lex column is dedicated to elevating Nigel Farage. It's not a critical piece. European retail banks are quasi public utilities. The state has supported National Westminster Bank since the financial crisis and owns about 39% of the Coutts Bank. It needs good reason to deny services to any Briton. Now, that's a lie, and I'll come to that lie soon. In an earlier flub, Alison Rose attempted to avoid a grilling from a Treasury Select Committee hearing. She later reversed that decision. Running a big bank requires a thick skin and political savvy. Charlie Nunn of Lloyds and Santander's Anne Botin have both attributes. Rose's credentials now look rather weaker. In fairness to Rose, Farage was offered an ordinary NatWest account. The full text of bank documents might show Coutts in a better light. Bank chiefs have weathered worse scandals, but an uncomfortable catch 22 applies to all bosses concerning errors by subordinates. In Rose's case, including Coutts' chief executive Peter Flabel, either they consented to it or they were not aware of it and should have been. Now, that is the piece on Lex, elevating Nigel Farage to a statesman almost. As I said, my studies about Nigel Farage that I have done during the, let's say, 15 years or so that he has been featuring in the British news. My studies and my examination of the evidence, my world exclusive examination of the evidence, contextual evidence, confirmed to me that Nigel Nasty Farage is a liar. The Nigel Nasty Farage is a fraudster. The Nigel Nasty Farage is a thief. And that the financial crimes running that Lex column promoting Farage today is disgracefully being dishonest. I shall I shall check the Financial Times, the rest of it, and then come back to that piece. Now, going back briefly to the Gillian Tett piece in the magazine Financial Times Weekend Magazine, this news item, datelined from Florida by Stefania Palma and Lauren Fedor in Washington. Well, dateline from Washington, but it's about Florida. This is headed Trump's secret documents trial delayed to May 2024. Now, this is something that may not be made public yet, not at least until after the election or the nominations. But this may be to do with the secret operation of the secret state that may still be sympathetic to the racist agenda fronted by Donald Trump, and the operation may be intended to give the racists and fascists another opportunity by installing or facilitating the installing of Trump in the White House a second time. And this also is a mirror, if you like, of the inabilities and the weakness and timidities on the part of the Democratic Party in the USA. This is my reading, and my reading independent. And since the time of Richard Nixon and the spying of the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate building. That is the name. That's the reason why this is called the Watergate scandal. I believe that the United States Democratic Movement, Democratic Party, in terms of the agenda, in terms of its duties and remits, has been far weaker than it should have been. And it is the historical structural weakness that can be attributed to the main leaders of the Democratic Party in the USA being themselves racists. These factors may contribute to what they may be expecting, but what the right is confidently working on, a return of Donald Trump to the White House. Now, that is the comment for today about Trump's possible return. That doesn't mean that I'm making the final comment on that one. All kinds of other variables depend. Now, in the Financial Times, the Spanish far right fascist Santiago Abascal is being promoted as being a far right fascist comparable to Franco. They're saying that nobody has been as influential for the far right since Franco in Spain. Now, I would say that after the retreat of the fascists in France, in Spain, that is, the so called anti fascists in Spain have failed to catch up, let alone to prepare for the abolition of fascism as a significant force in politics. Now, I found a piece on Farage that I suspected was there in the Financial Times in addition to the Lex column. This is the picture of Farage that contained the financials, free speech storm. Now they are calling it free speech storm. That is to say that denying Farage a bank account or blocking his bank account or closing his bank account is equal to Farage's free speech being denied. Has engulfed the leadership of the Coutts Bank's owner, which is the National Westminster Bank. Well, there is another piece about Farage, quite apart from the lax one, which is the opinion in today's Financial Times, and I'll come to that. Remember, what I'm doing is discussing banking. Until the unit of partly state owned NatWest scores an own goal with debanking maneuver, Stephen Morris and Jim Picard. For more than 3 centuries, Coutts Bank has discreetly handled the finance of the country's wealthiest people. But the private banking arm of state backed lender NatWest now finds itself thrust into the spotlight after deciding to cut the ties. Well, I'll read that again because I have left out I have inserted a D which shouldn't be there. But the private banking arm of state backed lender National Westminster now finds itself thrust into the spotlight after deciding to cut ties with Nigel Farage, former leader of the UKIP and the Brexit Party. According to an internal Coutts memo he obtained and published this week, it was in part because of Farage's political views at odds with our position as an inclusive organization. That bit is a quotation from the internal memo. For a wealth manager, that counts confidentiality selling points to the rich. Weeks of hostile coverage and politicians' outrage could hardly be worse for its reputation. The backlash has included Rishi Sunak, who criticized the bank on Twitter for undermining free speech, getting a hear from the platform's owner, Elon Musk. The Ferrari has engulfed NatWest's leadership, from Coutts boss Peter Flabel to NatWest chief executive Dame Alison Rose and chair Sir Howard Davis, who face calls from MPs to appear at a parliamentary inquiry. Rose was forced to apologize to Farage and promise a review of the decision. Farage's campaign has sparked a debate on powers banks and payment groups have to cut off hundreds of thousands of people per year from the mainstream financial system with little or no transparency, in particular politically exposed persons such as MPs. It raises questions about a company's right to jettison clients when their personal views conflict with corporate purpose, particularly on diversity and inclusion. Now, they have mentioned the hundreds of thousands of people without transparency. This piece is longer than would be capable of being included in this broadcast. But I can say that the only time that I have come across any discussion about the abuse of powers by the banks, whether it be courts or a less traditional bank, this is the first time. But even in this piece, they're not talking about anyone else in the population, in the demography, that they consider to be equal in terms of importance to Nigel Farage. Now, despite the fact that they have called him the leader of the UKIP and Brexit parties, Nigel Farage, on his personal record, is a liar, a fraudster, and a criminal, and an inciter of hatred. And as a promoter of Powell and the National Front, Nigel Farage, quite apart from what the internal documents in the Coutts Bank reportedly say about him, Nigel Farage should never be given this extra significance. The only time and the only ground and the only reason why and when the Financial Times or any of the part of the other part of the media or any member of parliament or Rishi Sunak should give any importance to Nigel Farage is when they have held him to account for his racism, for his criminality, for his record of lying, which they haven't done. The other point is about the lack of regulation. There is no auditing of any institution in this country, as we have exclusively, and there is no regulation for the financial organizations, institutions. And the financial regulator that does exist is worse than a dead organization. Now, because of the complexity of the issues involved, the evidence, the world exclusive evidence, exclusive analytical factual evidence that we have about the financial corruption, criminality, discrimination, racism that our movement, our campaign is witness to, and as exclusive, world exclusive evidence of, will be disclosed. And as I said before, not in this particular edition, but the impact and the implication of the racism and discrimination and the corruption and fraud that individual banks represent and the collective entity of the banking system represents exceeds the combined wealth that all the known billionaires of the world, the Western world, have. That is how serious is the impact and the implication of the evidence that we have of banks' regular, routine criminality, fraud, and racism and racist discrimination and obstruction to banking services and facilities to people, not just holding a particular opinion, but people of different ethnicity and racial backgrounds. So we shall come to that. Now, we shall come to that later, not in this edition, but then there is this other piece about the opinion piece in the Financial Times. The opinion piece is, where is the opinion piece? Just refer to it. We're not going to read the whole of it, but just referring to it. There is a bigger piece in the Financial Times today about India and rice, and an opinion piece about the university degrees that is written by this mulatto boy. Stephen Bush's piece we shall discuss another time. Now, this is the okay. So this piece by John Gappa says, "Dear Nigel Farage, you can keep your Coutts account." This is by John Gappa. And so there are three major pieces in the financial weekend financial crimes supporting nasty Nigel Farage. And these are all lies and denials. I'll read the first paragraph only. Nigel Farage, the Brexit backing politician, this week released a memo from Coutts, the UK private bank, suggesting it dropped him as a customer more because it abhorred his views than because he had failed its financial criteria. Farage then condemned this as the march of woke corporation. I'll read that again. Farage then condemned this as the march of woke corporatism. So this piece by John Gappa is supposed to be a piece by Peter Flavel. Now, whatever the pretentiousness, what they are doing in those three major pieces in the financial weekend financial crimes about Nigel Nasty Farage having been blocked from an account, etc., is that they are perpetuating the racist, criminal, lying status quo. Financial services are not allowed to millions of people in this country. And that is what we shall be devoting our essay length analysis to. This particular edition has gone on for 1 hour, 41 minutes essentially. So we should bring it to an end at 11 hours GMT on Saturday, the 22nd of July. And we shall continue in the next editions in due course with other update issues.